Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. It's 12:30. I think we just made it in time. I'm Paul John Dykes. This is Patrick McGilp. Sorry for anybody, and I know there are tens of thousands of you out there who tune in to listen to Big John on a Wednesday. He's not available today. Hopefully he can tune in himself and listen in, Patrick. But welcome back. And no much to talk about, obviously. A week in the world at Celtic throws up a few talking points. Let's start with the football. Come on, let's be nice and positive, Patrick. What was your thoughts at the weekend? Always nice to get a late winner, isn't it?
And I doubted it was going to come actually when they equalised with about 7-8 minutes to go. But no, I mean the performance again, not a lot to sort of write home about. Basically it was a non-event in the first half, as has been the case for quite a few games this season. Second half were a bit better, a bit sort of freer. Tunetke at times looked like our only out ball. Throughout the entire match, he looks a really promising signing. Now, I don't want to be too harsh on the guy because he's only started 2 games, but I mean, Balak Wisha hasn't done nearly as much as what Tunetke done it in that 90 minutes at Rugby Park, so he certainly looks like a good signing. I think he had his press conference yesterday. So that was a really positive spark. In terms of the result, obviously, results elsewhere mean that we have a title challenge here, Paul John. We're in a title challenge with David McInnes's Hearts. Tony Bloom is 9 years ahead of schedule by the looks of things, and if there aren't changes in managers and at other clubs, I think they could really push for second. I don't think they've got the squad to challenge us over the course of 38 games, but I think they could really push second. And it was really important that we got that winner. I'm sure we'll come on and talk on it further, but I thought the penalty, definite penalty. The arms are in an unnatural position. The ball, you could make a case for it going towards goal. Because it takes a deflection, it's hard to really judge, but it's certainly, it's in the 6-yard box. The guy's get his arms in an unnatural position. So for me, it's a penalty. You'd be gutted if it went against you, but I think in the modern game that is a penalty. And credit to Ian Acho for stepping up and taking it. Brendan said after the game he is a bit of a confidence player. So fair play to him. I don't think he's had his critics. There's been a lot of speculation about him potentially being overweight, being a free agent, the way that it sort of came about the day after deadline day. But he's a quality player. Brendan got the best out of him. He was a half decent youngster at Man City. I think he had a decent season or two at Sevilla. So we know his qualities. It's just about getting him fit and getting him in the right positions and giving him chances. And luckily, I think he can kick on now, scoring that, because I think with him being a confidence player, as Brendan said, if he missed that penalty, you just don't know how things are going to go with him. But let's hope he can kick on now. Let's hope Celtic can kick on now, football-wise, because we've got a 9-point gap over our rivals in Glasgow, and we're level in points with our rivals along the M8, who appear to be mounting a semi-credible title challenge early in the season.
And every time we talk about it, I'm giving big kudos to our very own Quinny, because he called it in May. He said that Hearts could split Celtic and Rangers, and many scoffed at Quinny. But if you get one right, it's always good to highlight that. I'm keen to get people's thoughts in, because there's going to be football, and there's also going to be some of the financials in the boardroom discussions that unfortunately have to be had. It's as simple as that in the world of Celtic at this moment in time. Bizarrely enough, last night as I was doing some uploads, Patrick, on the YouTube channel, on Acsom's YouTube channel, if you've not already subscribed to it, get on there and subscribe. Often what it will do is a recommended loop. So there was like a row of half a dozen videos from Acsom's channel, and one popped up, and it was myself and my good friend Tony Haggerty 4 years ago, talking about the silence from Dermot Desmond and Peter Lawwell. And it just popped up, and I thought to myself, when did we record this? And it was 4 years ago. I'm sitting in a studio in Dalkeith talking to Tony about very much similar issues that we face just now. And I do think, Patrick, right, that there have been opportunities, certainly moments, where the Celtic fans could definitely have created a movement, an action, an uprising, whatever you want to describe it as. And we really haven't. Why do you think it happened now? What was the straw that broke the camel's back, do you reckon?
Yeah, you know, I spoke on the podcast, I think at the end of last season, saying that there will come a time where we don't qualify for the Champions League and we have massive amounts of money in the bank. And at that point, it simply becomes unacceptable. And I think that's what we've all seen the last 4 weeks. Add into that the shambles of deadline day, add into that the shambles of a board member briefing against the manager, add into that the statement. And you've got a perfect storm almost. I mean, COVID, you had guys, you know, maybe taking it a bit too far, sort of throwing fences and stuff, but you had protests outside the stadium. I think those protests continued into the sort of early part of Angie's campaign. But I think the nature of that I think that's the only time it's ever really came close to a sort of proper sustained protest. But obviously we had COVID then, we had lockdowns and stuff, and then when Ange came in, you know, the football was so free flowing and positive, and you know we were having a bit of a title race, and we had to back the manager, and everyone sort of bought into it. So that all sort of died down, and then since then, as you say, the last 4 years, we've won doubles and trebles, and you know totally dominated Scottish football again. So there's, you know, for a lot of people, there's been no real need to protest. It's all sort of went swimmingly. Um, but it's already gone wrong. I mean, I can't see us losing the league. I think Hearts probably are a more credible challenge than Rangers at the moment. But I can't see us losing the league. But the other sort of bare minimum that we have to achieve each season is the Champions League, and we've already failed. So someone has to be held accountable. No one has been so far. Um, you know, the protest obviously occurred at the weekend there. I thought it was quite successful. I seen the figure 75% took it up, which I
Mm.
think is a fairly positive figure for, you know, a really dedicated away support who spend a lot of money watching Celtic home and away. Um, so I think that was positive. Um, but you know, someone has to be held to account. As you know, the tagline says, the financial report that will come out, you know, presumably within the next few days, and then you have the AGM at the end of November, and I'm sure these protests will continue because there is enough discontent and enough anger still, I think, from this failure. And as you say, you and Tony spoke about it 4 years ago. It's the same problem. It just hasn't been resolved yet because the football inside has been near perfect. I mean, we were 7 minutes from a treble last season. It was the best European campaign I've ever seen. As a 24-year-old Celtic supporter, last season was as good as it's got for me
Hmm.
personally.
Hmm.
And obviously we've had a treble under Ange, a double in Rodgers' first season, Ange's first season. You know, we've had some good times over the last 4 years, but the problem does remain, and the problem will keep reappearing if we don't sort it out.
No, they will, because you're on a cycle, and what happens within that space, which is the boardroom, is there is a, and I keep saying it, there is a culture. There is a culture of what are you moaning about, right? And I got a wee bit of that last week when speaking to people who have no skin in the game, where they're saying, what Celtic fans got to moan about? But there is that kind of belief within the club, within the club, that we shouldn't be complaining, we shouldn't be taking them to task. We have examples of this as well. And, you know, with regards to actually taking positive action, taking action that is vocal, that is visual, that we don't expect anything to happen after one particular protest. This is an ongoing escalatory campaign. You then are scrutinised yourself for doing it. So the group who have come together, who did as much as possible within that week leading up to the protest, Patrick, in respect of trying to garner as much opinion as possible in a short space of time by putting out a survey to the Celtic supporters. And that survey almost hitting 40,000 in terms of people who contributed to that. Then bringing together the 420 plus signatories from the open letter, which covered all the main associations and groups, but at no point saying we are the voice of the entire Celtic fan base, because that is impossible, Patrick. That is impossible to get a view of the entire Celtic fan base. But I think within 1 week, what the group did really well was got as much information and opinion as possible. And it was decided on the Sunday to do what we did. Now, the thing with that, though, Patrick, is Celtic fans, fellow Celtic fans, then scrutinise what you've done, scrutinise the survey to say that it was unfair and the questions were too leading, etc., 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 if they don't agree with the action. And that's fine. People won't agree with it. But what is the alternative? What is the alternative for you and I to get together in 4 years and say, remember, we were speaking about this 4 years ago, Patrick, and nothing has changed? Is that the alternative? Because I don't think it is. And another thing, Kevin comes up to mention top cards. What actually happens here, Patrick, is in relation to creating content, which is free of charge every single day, right? If you look over a normal week, we if there's 2 games in a week, even more so, we will go out 12 times a week in a 7-day week, 12 times a week. Every single part of that is free. How do you think you're able to finance that, Kevin? Now and again, people will offer you brand deals. I mean, you look at the biggest channels on the planet on YouTube, and they're sitting there with bottles of Huel. They're cutting away for brand advertisements, etc. A number of times throughout the show. We are independent. We have no sponsor. We have no financial backing. So if Topps come along and say, right, we've got Celtic, official Celtic Topps cards, it's not like we're pushing betting or boozing or any of that kind of stuff, is it? It's not like we're advertising the British Army, Kevin. It's Topps cards for the Waynes. So hopefully I've got that one off my chest. There we go. And in terms of what you actually think you get for that, it's like Spotify with music, Patrick. You know what I mean? Over a period of time, you might get a tenner. It's one of the ones. Magnet 67, here we go. Looking forward to meeting some of you on the 3rd. You are, of course, Magnet, talking about the Scott Brown gig at Barra's Art and Design. An incredible figure in the world of modern Celtic, and someone that I've been chasing for 3 years, Patrick. And again, it's one of the ones where these events are brilliant. They're absolutely fantastic to bring Celtic fans together, have a bit of entertainment, and if you're lucky enough to get in there early to get the VIP meet and greet and all that, you might even meet Scott Brown. So I'm looking forward to that. And remember, and come along and say hello if you're in the building that night. John Mullane, he will retire. We're talking now about Peter Lawwell, quietly at the AGM or before the new year. I want to talk about all of that. But Patrick spoke about our new striker, Kelechi Iheanacho, and he has, of course, replaced Adam Idah. Adam Idah has left the building. We spoke a wee bit about him yesterday. I don't think you can look upon Adam Idah as a flop, Patrick. I looked at his figures yesterday. You know, he played 1 full season. He won 4 trophies, 2 doubles, scored the winner in the Scottish Cup final, and he contributed 29 goals and a few assists along the way. Some big goals, some European goals. Not a flop in my mind. Yeah, we lost a few quid on him. Not a great deal, though. I mean, the fee that we paid was actually £8.5 million for Adam Idah. And I think that in terms of the overall value of your squad, or even the likelihood of a player leaving the football club for a number of reasons, you know, that would have been different, I reckon, if we were in the Champions League. Of course it is. If you're in the Champions League playing at the very top table of European football, then the value of your players are going to be higher. So I don't see Adam Idah as a flop. And he's 24 years of age, Patrick, and I'm sure we'll see big moments from him in his career. It just didn't work out this season. I don't know why. I think he had an opportunity to take over from Kyogo. A couple of things happened, one of them being Maeda's form that was beyond Idah's control. And Celtic didn't really want to push him out the door. It wasn't something that Idah had requested, according to Rodgers. So we just wish him well, but I can't look at Adam Idah as a flop.
No, I don't think so. I think he was maybe in danger of becoming a flop if he stayed. So maybe his legacy is almost protected by him leaving. That's just my opinion. Maybe I'm being quite harsh there. But as you say, I mean, 9 goals in a loan spell, 20 goals as a permanent signing the following season. You buy him for 8.5 or 9, you sell him for 7 or so. I mean, that goal that he creates, I mean, it's an own goal technically, but the goal that he creates against young boys to get us into the top 24, that pays off that 1.5, 2 million and then some, no doubt. So I think in a financial sense, I don't think we lost money there at all. I think that's actually quite good business in a way, which I don't think a lot of people would have foreseen a few weeks ago. But no, I don't think he's a flop. He obviously, I mean, that goal, I mean, how many guys can say they scored a last minute winner in a Scottish Cup final for Celtic against Rangers?
Yep.
Not many, not many. So that goal will sort of live on forever in the minds of Celtic fans. So his legacy there is secure. So he sort of came in, he done a job, we signed him permanently, and you know he couldn't quite become the first choice striker, and you wish him well. I mean, I think we sold him deadline day. 4 or 5 days later, he comes on for Ireland and scores a last minute winner. So you know, good on him. Hopefully, his confidence hasn't been hammered too much by the last few weeks or months, and he can really kick on down in Swansea. But no, definitely not a flop for me. And in terms of his replacement, Iheanacho, I sort of touched on it slightly. His quality is definitely there. There is no doubt about his quality. I think it's a bit like, it's maybe a bit of a stretch, but to say sort of Aaron Moy, Kasper Schmeichel, Joe Hart, he's not as old as those guys, but the quality's definitely there. And it's just about whether the manager can get a tune out of him. He can stay fit, he can stay consistent. I mean, I had a sort of quick glance at his stats. He's never been, a top goal scorer. I think his best goal scoring season was 19 goals. So playing in Scotland, they'll hope to get more than that. I assume being our first choice striker, but I think he could end up having a really good season for us. Ian actually he certainly made a brilliant start. So I wish both players all the very best.
The big thing for me with Adam Ida is I always remember as a young spud, now this shows you how old I am. You've already revealed your age today, Patrick. VHS tapes, and a few times a year, but generally around about the Christmas and birthday time, having been born in December, I would always get one or two that had been released that year from Celtic. And there was one, because it's a sign of the times, called Hail, Hail, Old Firm Classics, right? Obviously, that would be renamed if there was going to be a volume two. And as a kid watching that, you're absolutely right. You are watching the guys that scored in cup finals against Rangers, Patrick. You're looking at the history of Celtic. In that particular video, although I've not watched it for a long time, it's on that shelf somewhere. The 7-1 games in there, the Hampden Riot games in there. You've got Andy Lynch slotting one away in 1977. And the reason I bring that up is because all of these guys, there was a goal scored by Joe Craig. Joe Craig probably is not in the list of 50 Celtic greats or any of that kind of stuff. But he etched his name into the history books of Celtic by scoring an important goal against Rangers. And that's exactly what Adam Ida done, forevermore. Adam Ida has written himself into the Celtic history books, and fair play to him. The man who has taken his jersey, if you like, the man who's come in, Kelechi Iheanacho, I said yesterday, Patrick, I don't think this is a slight on Celtic. I think that if a player like him who comes through at Manchester City, I mean, he's not incredibly prolific, but he scores 21 goals in 64 games for Man City, and he plays Champions League football for them. He scores against us in the Champions League. Was it the 3 each game he scored in? He scored in one of the games that Brendan Rodgers was in charge of Celtic. And he looks as though the trajectory, the star is shining, the trajectory is going in one way, gets a massive move, 25 million quid to Leicester. And he's there for a while, but you're quite right in what you say. He doesn't, he's not a massively prolific striker. He scores 19 goals, which is his personal best. And that was in 39 games. So very, very good return. And I've got to say again, 3 in Europe that season for Leicester. And he's been a bit derailed. Now, you've got to remember, he goes to Seville only in 2024, and then he's got that Middlesbrough loan deal. People are looking at fitness and weight and all this kind of stuff. I honestly believe, particularly when you consider that his best spell in senior football was when he was being managed by Brendan Rodgers, I honestly believe we can tap into this player. Now, the thing with this, though, Patrick, is we're looking at either last season scoring 20 goals. If Iheanacho scores 20 this season, is that a success? I would say probably, yeah. Under the circumstances, bringing him in, he's never scored 20 goals in his football career in a season. Bringing him in the way that we did, I would say, yeah. And again, Brendan Rodgers' teams generally spread the goals out as well.
Yeah, I was just about to say that actually. For a Brendan Rodgers side, 20 to 25 goals a season, or even just 20, would be a fantastic return. You think back to the first spell, you have Armstrong chipping in, you've got Roderick chipping in. Sinclair was a prolific goal scorer on the left. I think in his second and third season, Forrest chipping in with sort of 15, 20 goals. And then you sort of forget headers from the likes of Sviatchenko and Boyata and Simunovic and all these types of players, and even Lustig, I think, chipped in. Callum McGregor, obviously. So you get goals from all over the park. It is a bit different from, you know, under Ronnie Dyla, Griffiths scored 40 in one season, but I think the whole team was geared towards the striker almost, and he was in many ways a bright spark in that second season for Ronnie. And then you look at Ange's second season, I think Kyogo scores 34 goals, I want to say. And again, it's like, it's about getting to the byline and cutting it back for the striker sort of thing. So, I've actually, spoken a few times with my mates about this. Messi and Ronaldo have totally destroyed the concept of what is a good season for a striker. Back 15 years ago, 20 to 25 goals would be a brilliant season for a guy like Scott McDonald. But nowadays you're thinking, well, that's about average. And really it's not. If you're scoring 20 to 25 goals as a striker, I think that's a great return. So, on one hand, fair play to Adamida, but on another hand, looking at Iheanacho, I think that's probably what he's aiming for. He's probably thinking, if he can get 19 goals playing in the Premier League, I don't know if they were in Europe that season or not, and then, coming to Scotland, playing in the Europa League, you would look at it as being, I think he probably is going to be your first choice going forward. I mean, Yamada's not been included in the Europa League squad, so we're running with Iheanacho, I would say. So I think he will be our first choice, unless, of course, we go with Maeda through the middle. But I'm unsure if we'll sort of persevere with that. But yeah, I think 20 to 25 goals. It'll be a personal target for him, no doubt, trying to sort of break that 19 in a season. And I think it'd be a great return for us because, as we've said, Tuneke looks promising. Maeda chipping in with goals. Guys in the midfield, Hatate, Niguin's already got a few. Balak Wisha on the other side, Forest to still get, a sort of place in the squad. So there's hopefully goals from all over the park. So I think 20 goals for Iheanacho would be a brilliant return, especially, I mean, if he can take a penalty. That's
Absolutely.
also beneficial. I mean, that's cost us already this season, not being able to take a penalty. So I think he could rack up the numbers if he stays fit and Brendan gets the best out of him. But obviously, no guarantees. He does need to stay fit. But again, I think he turns 29 next month. So he is in almost the prime of his career, what should be the prime of his career. I know pace was a big thing for him early in his career, but if he can work on his finishing, getting in the box, getting in the right places, I'm sure Brendan will get the best out of him. Hall player as well, if he score a few headers. So, it might turn out to be quite a good signing, but again, I think the problem that we all have is, and we've said it with Kasper Schmeichel, we've had months and months to scout these guys. We've not been able to get a target over the line. In this case, it was actually after deadline day. Sevilla released them so they didn't have to deal with us because we're that terrible to deal with. But the player might end up being a good signing. It's how we got to this point is where everyone's problem is. The squad itself, luckily, due to Brendan's Rolodex, is actually in a okay position considering the shambles we were in only 2 or 3 weeks ago.
I just hope that, come Christmas, where that Christmas advert comes out, the guy or girl that's on social media duties that day isn't scared to post it, the Christmas advert I'm talking about, and they work Brendan's Rolodex into the actual advert as well. They need to do that. But you've actually sparked my memory. 2016-17, Brendan Rodgers' first season in charge at Celtic, Patrick. And you're right. Look at the spread of goals. Look at the guys who got into double figures. So you had Scott Sinclair scoring 25 goals that season. Stuart Armstrong, 17. Tommy Rogic, 12. Probably every one of them was a worldly goal as well. Patrick Roberts, 11. And then you've got Lee Griffiths with 18 and Moussa Dembele with 32, 50 goals between the two of them. So you've got 2, 4, 6 different players all into double figures there. Unbelievable, isn't it, when you consider that? And so many of those guys were great at scoring from outside of the box where you're up against packed defences and they would pull a bit of magic. They'd pull something out the hat. You remember some of Armstrong's goals, Rogic, Roberts and Dembele, in fact, Lee Griffiths as well. They could all score from distance. So I'm looking forward to Iheanacho. I think you make a good point about the penalties because last season, all I was hearing was Arnie Engels only scores penalties. You need somebody to score penalties. Penalties are massive. And nobody was saying that in the 95th minute at Rugby Park about penalty kicks, taking it for granted that somebody would actually slot it away. Plenty to discuss. The reason we're talking financials is there was a line in the Celtic statement that, again, will go down in history, but for all the wrong reasons, Patrick, which said, we recognise the importance of timing. And now they're going to have to drop the financials at some point very soon, Patrick. And they cannot hide behind the hunters of money that we still have. So let's get some of your thoughts coming through. Yeah, Phyllis Kirk, I know. We want Yoki as well. The big man. He's just not available today. And hopefully we will see him next week. Is there a sell on with Ida? Shadow 7, never read anything about it. Wouldn't surprise me. We're very good. I mean, listen, we give the club credit where credit's due. We're very good at getting the sell-ons in. I was hearing the final amount combined. Patrick, check this out. The final amount combined that we made for Ben Doak, this is where he goes to Liverpool initially, and now that he's left Liverpool, we have made £3 million out of that deal, all in. So that's good. But I mean, let's be honest, that's good business. Very, very good business, right? So I mean, I would rather have a £25 million player at the football club. Of course I would. But in terms of sell on, very good business. Thomas Burns, we may have £100 million in the bank after this year's. This is the figure that keeps popping up, Patrick. Because you look at what we had last time round, you look at the fact that we actually made quite a bit of profit in the transfer window. You look at other sales within the football club and Champions League endeavours, etc., and what that brings in. And 100 million is what a lot of people are looking at. We'll see very shortly if that's accurate. Are we the only fans in the world who will have a negative response to this? I don't think so, Thomas. I think any football club that's got that kind of money in the bank, and I mean, I'll give you my own honest opinion as to where the club needs to improve, like real, broad strokes, right? The stadium, completely, at this point, completely at a stage where it needs massive investment financially, massive investment. The academy, I think the academy, and I don't mean the training facilities per se. I think the academy needs absolutely torn up. It needs investment in relation to the staff that work there and also the data analysis that we use to develop those players. I mean, yeah, the club will say, oh, we'll put Sean Maloney in as a pathway manager. We're building this new complex at Barfield. I get that. But I just think that in terms of having £100 million in the bank, where's our best in class when it comes to data analysis, both for the players you've got at the club to develop them, but also in terms of recruitment. So yeah, we need to invest in all these different things as well as bodies on the park. Where is the match day experience? Where's the hotel? Where's the museum? Where is it? It's not there. And we've got £100 million in the bank. And as somebody pointed out again this morning, and I think I worked it out last year, the corporation tax that we paid on our profit was £7 million. So yeah, you need that buffer. I have a very, very good conversation lined up for Friday night. So we'll be dropping that in. And for me, this is a very important thing, Patrick, when we're talking about this. The conversation I have isn't right down the line, the board need removed, we're no good enough at X, Y, and Z. The conversation I have on Friday night is with someone who has been involved in a business that turns over, £650 million a year. And we're talking from the business perspective. And I think it's important to bring somebody in who says, actually, this is what Celtic do really, really well, but they should improve on X, Y, and Z. So this is a conversation we're having on Friday night as well. I don't think we would be the only fan base in the world. Listen, we might be the only fan base in the world with £100 million in the bank, right? We had a dilapidated stadium and with a lack of investment in the squad resulting in us getting bounced out of Europe. But I don't think it's anything to do with us being a spoiled or entitled fan base, Patrick.
No, none of us are gutted at the singular issue of having £100 million in the bank. That, as a standalone point, is absolutely brilliant news, and I think we're all delighted at that. I'd much rather be £100 million in the green than £100 million in the red. It's when you look at the entire picture, we are all totally scunnered with the situation. I don't pay, or individuals don't pay £700 a year for a season ticket. To go and watch a bank balance. They go to watch 19 league games in which we expect to have an entertaining and winning football team, especially with the vast resources that we have. I think we have 5 times the other 11 SPFL clubs combined in the bank, money in the bank. It's absolutely ridiculous just how much money we have, and yet we are failing on the bare minimum. And I think that's what we're all annoyed at. I don't think we're annoyed at the money in the bank. We're annoyed at the failures in other parts of the club, despite having money in the bank. We could have easily, I've said before, I think the manager and players should have beaten Kairat anyway. But the reinforcements that we could have brought in. I mean, Brendan basically didn't have a front three that he trusted. We had an out of form Maeda, we had a 34-year-old James Forrest, and we had Yang, who shouldn't really be a first team player at Celtic. He was being offered to Birmingham before we pulled the plug only a few days later. So I think that is the annoyance. As you say with the stadium, I'm not sure if I actually said this last week. You had those minutes, of course, leaked, not leaked, sort of published from the Friday night meeting that the club had with the CSA, the affiliation, and the Irish sort of affiliation of CSCs. And they basically said they're not going to renovate the main stand while we're in the SPFL.
Stood
Now,
out
buildings have a
massively.
life. Yeah, buildings have a natural lifespan, right? So this will need to be done at some point. So
Yep.
either there's two scenarios here, according to them. Either they think within the next 50 years we are not going to be playing in the SPFL, or in 50 years we're not going to have a main stand. It really is as simple as that, according to that comment. So maybe they have big plans to move us into some sort of continental league where we're playing against Belgian and Dutch teams every week, or maybe we're trying to get into the Premier League again. But if they're not going to do anything to the main stand, anything structural, whether that be redeveloping it or knocking it down and starting again, if they're not going to do that with our current set of circumstances, there is going to come a point where it's either going to fall down, or we're just we're going to have a bit of crumbling stadium. And the same with other parts of the stadium. Other parts of the stadium are now 30 years old, which there's still a long way to go before it starts crumbling, but it does need investment, and anyone can see that. I was listening to um, someone who sits in the main stand. They don't have hot water in the toilets.
No.
I've never sat in the main stand, right, so I don't know, but I'm taking this guy's word for it. Don't have hot running water. One of my friends actually sits in the main stand. He pays a premium to sit there, and yet is moved around for European games. Doesn't know season to season where he's going to sit for European games. So it's not great value for money. Fair enough, you're in the sort of the old stand, the original stand, but I don't think that's great value for money. And that comment in particular, I mean, that is ridiculous. That talk about short-term thinking. I mean, obviously, we're all going to be a hell of a lot older in 50 years' time, but in 50 years' time, Celtic still need a main stand, and something needs to be done. And the old saying, "Fix the roof when the sun is shining." We have close to 100 million in the bank. We'll find out in a matter of days how much money we have in the bank, and yet just this timidness, timid approach to investment. I mean, it's just it's amateur hour. And I don't know who you've got on the show on Friday night, but the guy is obviously he's worked at a company 5 times the size of Celtic's turnover, so he knows how business works. He's obviously an expert in the field. I bet he's not timid when it comes to investing cash in the bank. I know you might make a bit of interest having 100 million sitting there, but as you say, the corporation tax we have to pay by not spending money is just obscene and a bit of a joke. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it, but these guys are not professionals in the way that they run a business, and that is the one of the many factors in why we are all annoyed. Not because, to come back to the original question, not because we have 100 million in the bank, but because the lack of investment of that 100 million when so many other areas in the club are failing.
You know this, Patrick, I think that's why it's important on a Celtic State of Mind, and generally it's a Friday night that we get the opportunity to do this, that you bring other views in. So we've spoken to, let's say, Tom Grant, who was a stadium manager when Celtic Park was rebuilt, right, under Fergus McCann. He was the manager of that stadium at that time. And you look at what the plan was, next phase, the aesthetic of it, etc., etc. And you bring Tom in, and he tells you, because he was there, he was at the coalface of that job. This isn't how it was meant to look. So when I'm doing the wander around Paradise for 6 months, I think, and I'm saying, wow, this place looks really tired. When there's no bodies about, it's early in the morning, this place looks really, really tired. And I know we can't go to the point of what Spurs Stadium called. I get that. But I had been doing it at Spurs. I had been doing it at Liverpool. I was looking about the footprint of those stadiums, and I was marvelling, because for me, they don't have the same history as Celtic in terms of how illustrious Celtic's history is. Marvelling at how they were able to brand the place and absolutely, bring every single facet of all the success and all the memories and all the characters and all that into the footprint, so that wherever you looked, it was just on brand. And you think about Celtic and all you see is a concrete graveyard. You absolutely do. It's tarmac and concrete all over the place. It's not quite falling to bits, but we're at that point where it's like, right, you need to maintain the 3 stands that were rebuilt, And you do. You need to completely rebuild the main stand. So when I seen the minutes, I was a bit like yourself. That one bit really jumped out at me, Patrick. I was thinking on two grounds. A, we're not doing it. But B, the caveat, which was whilst we're in the SPFL. And I thought to myself, right, in my Celtic supporting life, if I go back to probably right up to the point where Brian Dempsey gave a speech at Shettleston Halls, right? I had never considered Celtic playing outside of Scottish football other than in Europe, when you're playing in your European tournaments, right? That was it. I'd never thought about some newfangled kind of league where, countries all came together, etc. But Brian Dempsey spoke about it. And the meeting was in 1991, incidentally, and it's on our channel. We've uploaded it onto our channel. And he spoke about, at that time, what was called a British league, right? And he was talking about that. And I was thinking, at that point, as a Celtic fan, thinking, wow, the mind boggles. Imagine playing Man U and Liverpool and Arsenal. This was pre-Premiership and all the Sky money coming in. But it was one of the things, because you always love the testimonials. You love playing English clubs, something now and again in Europe. And it was a discussion point. You then fast forward to something we spoke to two individuals about previously. We spoke to Paul Smith about it. We spoke to David Lowe about it. And that was Project Strawberry, you'll remember, where Celtic tried to get into English football by buying Wimbledon Football Club in 1998. And it was massively Fergus McCann's vision. Fergus had this vision. He wanted Celtic out of the Scottish League for a number of reasons. I mean, the fact that it was a Goldfish Bowl and it was restrictive in terms of, what you could succeed in and what you could make and earn and all that stuff. There was that element. But there was also an element of Fergus where he looked at the situation and how Celtic were treated as a football club. Back then it was actually, I think, a lot worse when it comes to the officialdom. He had to take Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey? You'd have been better with Jim Carrey, by the way. You had to take Jim Farry to task over the George Cadet affair. There was that, the implications of Celtic always being on the outside looking in when it came to Scottish football, and Fergus McCann focused on that. He wanted us out the game. And that was, again, another attempt, a very serious attempt to get Celtic into the English game. Then Alan McDonald comes along. You'll remember he took over from Fergus. You'll not remember it. He took over from Fergus. And Fergus McCann's last words to Alan McDonald as he was kind of handing over the baton was, "Do not bring Kenny Dalglish to this football club." And Alan McDonald appointed Kenny Dalglish and John Barnes. Anyway, the thing that Alan McDonald spoke about, and it's a great, and I keep saying this, but there was a great feature in the Celtic View at the time, was this league whereby I think it was 7 or 9 different nations were going to come together and form a league. And this league, and it wasn't Real Madrid and all this kind of stuff. This was your Dutch teams and your Belgian teams and all this kind of stuff coming together, and they were basically going to have this hub, which was your kind of Super League, a transatlantic league, right? And you could get promoted into it and relegated out of it. So if Celtic got bounced out, whoever wins the Scottish League would get promoted in. That was the way it was going to work, and that was the next big thing. But it's not really been on the table for a long, long time, Patrick. Every now and again, you hear English pundits talk about what would happen if Celtic and Rangers came into the league, and they always say Celtic and Rangers, don't they? So when I saw that, it got me thinking, because that's the way I am, right? I'm thinking that's there for a reason. There was no coincidence, there was no error in that being mentioned. Why are they mentioning that? Is there something on the table, right? Now, what would we do as a fan base if someone got the opportunity to see Michael Nicholson's whiteboard, right? Because we believe that the plan is on there, on that whiteboard. And there's probably a post-it note underneath saying, "Must share this with Celtic supporters." And imagine on that whiteboard, there was some kind of a vision to play the football elsewhere. If that was the case, and I'm not saying it was or is, if that was the case, I could understand hoarding all this dough, because there would need to be some kind of way to get into this league, be that specifications with your stadium. Going into it, you would need to have big cash to go in and actually strengthen your squad. Celtic squad, as it stands right now, could not make that transition into a bigger, stronger league. We just couldn't, Patrick, right? As you say, we're actually at the moment, as we sit here, in a title race domestically. So if that was the case, right, maybe I'm looking too much into this. If that was the case, I would understand it. I can see no other reason for stockpiling £100 million in the bank. And if there is a reason, communicate, tell the supporters. And you know what takes the sting out a lot of this? Because, all right, there is a reason for that. It's not just bad money management. Going back to the minutes, do you think there's a possibility, Patrick, of Celtic still looking outside of the Scottish bubble?
I mean, judging by that comment, it sort of lends itself to that idea, doesn't it? You obviously have, going back to corporate governance again, you have a guy who was CEO for just under 18 years, and then within 18 months you bring him back as chairman, and he's not a very popular figure, but Peter Lawwell is the vice president or vice chair of the ECA, European Club Association. And that's obviously, there's no doubt about it, that's a very handy person to have as chairman of your football club. So again, that sort of lends itself to that idea that this is maybe on the cards. As you say, Celtic, I don't think have been involved in these conversations for the last 15, 20 years, but there have been many, many rumours, and one, that almost got off the ground sort of towards the end of the COVID season with a Super League, the European Super League with, I think it was 12 or 16 clubs sort of tried to get together, and it was quickly sort of quashed. And I've got no doubt, football is certainly trying to go that way. I'm still a bit unconvinced by it, or I'm still sort of undecided by it. The idea of having to fly to Bruges or Amsterdam every second weekend, I think that would, I think you're excluding a large demographic of supporters from going to see Celtic home and away. It's hard enough going up to Inverness and Dingwall and Aberdeen and Dundee and stuff, especially when you've got so many coming from the island of Ireland. So to then have these people, even guys, guys in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, having to fly into Glasgow, having to fly to Lisbon or Porto or things like that, I think it becomes very Americanized. But at the same time, if that happens, I definitely want Celtic to be there, because that is obviously where, maybe not the creme de la creme, where the Super League, the sort of 12, 15 Super League clubs like PSG, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, but in that sort of continental style league where, maybe a sort of Europa League version of a league structure, where we're playing Ajax and Benfica and stuff like that. Celtic would have to be at that table for me if something like that was to ever take off. It does, when you look at these small things that are sort of on the periphery and you scratch a bit behind the surface, you think, well, maybe there is something in that. We're not going to develop the stadium that's, almost not falling to bits. I think that's a bit unfair, but certainly extremely dated. I mean, I think the vast majority of that main stand is now 54 years old. There's parts of it that are over 100 years old. So it definitely needs investment. And then you look at the comment in the minutes, you look at Lawwell's association with the ECA, you look at the money in the bank, and you think, well, maybe there is something in this. But again, this is us sitting here totally despondent at being out the Champions League, making a pigsy with the transfer window, so much money in the bank that we literally don't know what to do with it. And so I don't know if we're clutching at straws here and just sort of hoping.
I know.
It's actually they're really playing 4D chess. They know what they're doing. There's a big master plan that we've just not been told about it. It's just a big secret. And really, I don't want to give them that much credit, because I truly don't think that's the case. I would love for it to be the case, and it would be the equivalent of pulling a rabbit out the hat sort of thing. But I really don't think that that's what's going on here. I have sort of been thinking, maybe are we overreacting? Is there a sort of greater plan here? Is there, are we being a bit too rash? No, I don't think we are actually. They're coming out with lies and excuses, and I think that's what it is. I think it is pure lies when it comes to this UEFA, FSR, PSR, whatever it's called. Our wages, I think, in previous accounts have been 50% of our turnover. The cap, I think, is 70%, and they're claiming that they can't spend money because of these UEFA rules. It is nonsense. It's simply not true. And again, with the stadium, they can't redevelop it when they're in the SPFL. I mean, come on, there's so many different finance initiatives out there. I think Yogi's spoken about it in the past. I've seen one or two comments come in. Spurs have got a 30-year mortgage on their stadium. They've taken out debt. I think they've done it pre-COVID, so they would have got a good interest rate. We've got so much money in the bank. We have a massive fan base who are galvanised and organised and angry and would quite happily take up a share issue if they wanted to fund it that way. Lennoxtown was funded by a share issue. That's how Dermot got his controlling interest in 2005. I think he went from 20% to 34% in one share issue. So there are many ways that you could finance a main stand redevelopment. So again, I just think it's nonsense. Unfortunately, I really don't think it's 4D chess. I don't think there's a master plan. I think it really is a lack of ideas and a lack of ambition. And just one more point, sorry. You were talking about, so that sort of 2000s period. You have Fergus. I've heard David Lowe speak about this, talking to you. You had really serious operators on that board back then. Brian Quinn, Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, really experienced guys in businesses. Sir Patrick Sheehy, he mentioned as well. Obviously Fergus. Dermot was on the board, but he wasn't the main man. He was one of many. And now you have this situation, and it sort of festered after Fergus left, where Dermot gets a controlling interest. Tom Allison's been on the board since 2001. Lawwell's been on the board since 2005. Brian Wilson's been on the board since, Lawwell's been on the board since 03, Wilson since 05. And it's just the same faces. There's a lack of energy, a lack of imagination, a lack of drive. And unfortunately, I think change is necessary. And that's what's been happening the last few weeks, luckily. To take it back to your point, if there is some sort of continental league, I think Celtic do need to be there. I don't think it's on the cards within the next couple of years, unfortunately. Despite his association with the ECA, with Lawwell, I certainly don't think this board are in a position to be at the cutting edge of anything, never mind a European Super League.
No, absolutely brilliantly put. And we are going to loop this right round and then start speaking again about Peter Lawwell and how this might impact everything, not just the fact that the timing of the financials coming out, the chairman's statement will be part of that, but also everything that happened last Friday with regards to Brendan Rodgers being asked some real, straight to the bone questions in and around the leak to the press. So, it seems as though everything's coming to a head. I tend to agree with David Lowe last week, where he said that Celtic won't want the fan, and particularly the fan movement, to think that we've got an upper hand and we've got what we want. Therefore, it may not happen immediately, but movements may be put in place in relation to removing certain individuals. Obviously, there's an AGM coming up as well. Jezzo Bell, you're on the YouTube. Celtic don't have a lot of money. Let that sink in. Rodgers wasted half the money in the bank last year on 2 record signings and trustee. Right. I'm going to try and unpick this bit by bit, Jezebel. You look at the net spend. Is this Chris Boyd? Is this Chris Boyd's burner account? Look at the net spend on Arnie Engels, Austin Trustee, and Adam Ida, right? Versus Matt O'Reilly leaving the building. And others. Matt O'Reilly wasn't the only person, right? And have a look at actually how much we spent net. We did not tap in to any resource, any bank. We didn't have to get the combination for the big vault underneath Celtic Park. We didn't need any of that to buy those 3 players. Money can easily be frittered away, absolutely. But you've got to understand, if you were to ring fence the transfer business that Celtic have done, we make money. And we have made money for a long, long time. I was looking at the figures recently over a period of something like 10 years, and up until the COVID season, we were like £13 million in credit then, if you want to look at the net. If you ring fence the transfers ins and outs, and you bring that right up to date, just that window there, as I've just said to you, Ben Doak, the Ben Doak deal brought in a total of £3 million. So 2.1 million of that was a sell-on that just dropped into our bank account there the now. We also had the Jeremy Frimpong money just dropped into our bank. So we ended up probably about 20 million quid. I think it was £13 million on transfers, Patrick, plus the Frimpong and the Doak money took us up to the best part of £20 million profit, Jezebel, just on transfers in one window. We don't have to be operating like that. I'd rather see that £20 million on the park and in time for the 2 games that we played against Kairat. David Boyle, Osman, Inamura, Shin and Kenny all going stale this season. What exactly is Sean Maloney's job remit? I'd love to hear from Sean Maloney. Just give us an interview on Celtic TV. Do a press event up at the park and invite fan media along, and all the different channels can put it out there. You know, let's hear what his remit is. What is Sean Maloney's remit? What is Paul Tisdale's remit? And what indeed is David Pleat's remit? I'm going to bring this one up. I was reading this morning with interest. He was talking to Jim White, who some might have seen a few clips of recently. Jim White doesn't think much of fan media, by the way, Patrick, in case you're wondering. I'm going to read out a quote, a direct quote from David Pleat. And the reason that I'm going to read this out will become clear. David Pleat, of course, was somebody that apparently Paul Tisdale brought in to do some scouting down south. What he does, who he's identified, nobody knows because there's no communication. Anyway, this is what he says to Jim White on TalkSport. A lot of smaller countries, when asked the question about Champions League and how Celtic can't compete in the Champions League. I hate that tone, right? That was going back to Ian Bankier. We can't compete in the Champions League. Yes, we can. Nobody's expecting us to win it, Patrick. You know, we're not that daft that we think we can go toe to toe against the clubs that are in the last 8 of the tournament. That's just different world, right? A lot of smaller countries, they're in the Champions League year after year, but don't make any progress. I mean, last year was progress, right? The Champions League is won by the biggest teams in the world. So it's very difficult. Thanks for that, David. It's to do with money. Brilliant. I mean, this is earth-shattering. If you don't get the very best players, which cost top dollar, it's very hard to succeed. I had a look at David Pleat. I thought he's been in the game a few years, 63 years he's been in professional football. And that is it. That's what you come out with. It's all about money. We can't actually compete. Absolute nonsense, right? Nobody expects Celtic to win the Champions League, Patrick. But last season showed you what we can do and where our place could be at this moment in time. And see, as a Celtic fan, this is my opinion, and please feel free to disagree. If Celtic were to be in that middle section of the Champions League stage, more often than not, that's where I think we should live and breathe, right? Where we were last season, and we got our playoff, and we might have got through that playoff into the last 16, and we wouldn't have had enough to go any further last season. But what you then should do is strengthen that team that was out there. And I've already pointed this out. Brendan Rodgers said it after the game, Patrick. And the frustration grows when you don't. Because when you don't replace like for like in terms of quality, Kairat happens. I was astonished to hear David Pleat talking like this because I'm very much like, you know what, fill your room with like-minded individuals with a similar vision and ambition. Have an ambition. And you know, if it all comes into money, we all go back to that, but you know, you can't compete. What to do with your 100 million quid is invest in the best possible structure within a football club. Have a structure within a football club where you are focusing on the academy a hell of a lot more, Patrick. You have the best data analysis. Right. Hearts are going to be a good example this season. Right. I don't think they're going to win the league. I'd love to see them come in second. And I am no fan of Hearts and what the club stands for and the toxic atmosphere at Tynecastle and what they sing. But in terms of football, Patrick, I'd love to see somebody putting a wee bit of investment into some of the things we're talking about and showing just what can be done. Now, that's domestic. Celtic could put 10 times that investment and then see what happens in Europe. But we don't. We don't. We get a glimpse behind the curtain, and then we've got this David Pleat attitude of, you know, we can't compete anyway. Whatever we get's a bonus. I read that this morning, shaking my head. It took me back to Ian Bankier's time at Celtic.
Yeah, I mean, it's another example of the culture within the club. This idea that it's really, really good to just take part in these things and we can't compete. These guys must have went to the games last season with their eyes closed and, you know, earmuffs in, just not seeing or listening to anything. We get 12 points in the Champions League last season. I think Liverpool finished top with 21. If that's not competing, I don't know what is. As you say, none of us expect us to go and win the Champions League. I don't think there's a single Celtic fan who honestly thinks we have any chance of that, and that is not our expectation. Our expectation, as a bare minimum, when you're coming up against a team from Kazakhstan whose record signing is 290,000 quid, to knock them out to qualify and then to compete, just win a couple of games, show a bit of pride and determination and a bit of spirit, and give us a few good nights at Celtic Park. That's all we are really asking for here. I mean, last season there was a few really good results, one or two sort of disappointing results. You end up going through. with the luck of the draw and all that sort of thing, and then you've got a great away performance to Bayern Munich. And that's a great season. This season, we might not get the luck of the draw. We might have only won one or two games, but it's about being there. It's about putting yourself in that position. You mentioned Hearts there. Imagine Tony Bloom comes in and he buys up, was it 29.9% or whatever, and he comes in and he goes, well, Hearts are actually really doing quite well to get third. And I think I'm just happy with the way things are. That's not what he's saying. He's coming in and he's saying in 10 years, if we don't win the league, I'll be disappointed. I mean, the ambition of that is just off the scale compared to what we're used to at Celtic. So I think David Pleat, I mean, he's came in to work under Paul Tisdale. It sounds as if that culture has totally infected near enough everyone in the club that we're happy to be there. We've got no chance of competing. It's full of all these big dogs with all this money, and we can't possibly do anything. And that's why change is absolutely necessary. But otherwise, we're going to just have a repeat of this story for years to come. I mean, I was quite shocked. I had to sort of go back and check, but 5 out of the last 5 times we've played a qualifier, we failed to get through. And obviously, we've had the automatic qualification for 3 years. That is a shambolic record, and there's no reason to believe that will change next season because automatic qualification is now gone. It's finished for another 5, 10, 15 years. Who knows when we will automatically qualify next? We need to start racking up coefficient points in the Europa League essentially. So something has to change, whether it be at board level, shareholder level. I'm convinced the problem is Dermot Desmond. It rots from the top down, as far as I'm concerned. So I think change must come, or else we're going to be stuck in this cycle forevermore. And I was going to say something else there. I've forgotten now. But sorry, to take it back to 2022, even. I mean, I was saying there last season, these guys must have had their eyes closed going to games when we did compete. We were in the Champions League. We spent 26 million in 3 players, and we did compete. We had great nights at Celtic Park. Take it back to 2022. Again, these guys must have their eyes closed. Rangers got to the Europa League final, and there's guys coming out here saying, "Oh, we can't compete in Europe. It's just not possible. There are too many big teams with too much money." Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And the Europa League this season, you don't have Champions League teams dropping down. It is now easier than when Rangers got to that final. They played Dortmund, they played Leipzig. Teams of that caliber they're just not in the Europa League anymore. They don't drop down. So they can try and pull the wool over our eyes, but I think enough people have had enough, and they realise that we are totally underperforming in Europe and have been for outside a handful of good seasons. We've been underperforming for 15, 20 years now, and the accounts will get an interesting reaction. I hope the protests continue, and then I think the big chance is the AGM, where as many disgruntled shareholders and fans need to get along as possible and just really, lay into these guys with the truth that we are not operating at the highest possible level we should be. We're actually nowhere near it.
I absolutely. By the way, Patrick, and with regards to the final point which led the tagline today, the timing of all this is coming to a head. The financials are going to be released. The chairman's statement will be part of that. The AGM, I think November is coming up.
Usually late November, isn't it? Yeah.
Is it time? Would it work? Do you think the club might even consider this, that it is time for the chairman to step down, and it might happen at the AGM, and they won't use the fan action as the reason for it? They will use some other reason, and he'll step down. Do you think that's possible? And do you have the same concerns as myself in relation to that, where it really is just like get another chess piece? You're talking about 4D chess. That's why I'm using another chess piece. Click it into the game and just continue as before with this culture and this lack of vision and this lack of ambition. That's a big thing. I mean, getting someone out of the position is one thing, but going back to your point where you've got the absentee landlords with so much dominance and control at Celtic, you think to yourself, well, somebody else will just get shimmied in there and they'll just continue as normal. And it's an empty gesture. If that's the case, it's an empty gesture.
Yeah, another empty suit that just acts as, a sort of a barrier between the fan base and Dermot Desmond, who I believe is a real problem. I think, to be fair to the board or whoever makes this decision, asking Lawwell to retire would probably be quite smart on their side of things, because it probably would placate a lot of the unhappiness, a lot of the fans who are currently unhappy and protesting. If rumours are to be believed, it would be us getting rid of the person who leaked that story to the Sun about Brendan on Friday night, Saturday morning last week. So I think from them it would actually be quite a smart decision. Could they do it? I think they definitely could. A lot of people still blame him for what is going on just now, which I don't think is accurate. I think it's Dermot Desmond and Michael Nicholson who are, the other two that are really responsible. He is the chairman. He may or may not have leaked that story to the Sun, but I don't think he's responsible for the transfer window per se. But again, you talk about that culture. He's been there since September 2003. He is definitely responsible for the culture of qualifying is really good and we can't compete, and it's good to be 1 point ahead of Rangers. So I think he could retire. I think he is 66, 67. He's a very wealthy man. He might not be. He probably can't be bothered with the hassle of people singing his name every Saturday at Celtic Park. So I think it probably would placate a lot of supporters who have annoyed a lot of the protests. But as you say, that doesn't fix anything, because they would just get another one of Dermot Desmond's pals to fill that role. A guy with no ambition who's happy to sort of get tickets to every game and collect a wage and do what the billionaire tells him, just like the rest of them. And again, corporate governance, actually, sorry, didn't barely even mention this. Guys like Tom Allison, who have been there 25 years, guys like Brian Wilson, 20 years, Peter Lawwell, to be a CEO and then come back as a chairman. Again, just a horrific standard, an absolutely horrific standard. And it would solve that problem, I suppose, to get rid of those three guys, because that is not good corporate governance. Those guys really shouldn't be there. So for all of that, it could be seen as a positive and it could be seen as a win when it comes to the protests. But what I hope doesn't happen is it placating the supporters and ending the protest, because for a lot of the real issues here of not being in the Champions League, having a disastrous transfer window, it goes a lot higher than Peter Lawwell, in my opinion.
Well, listen, we're going to finish on that because I'm not sure I could top it, Patrick. Thank you very much for that. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved in the chat as well. Lots happening in the world of Acsom. I'm about to bounce back into Glasgow, spend half my life out there. And very, very soon, Acsom will be based in Glasgow. So looking forward to that. Lots happening under the video. So click the links and get involved. And thank you, every single one of you, for getting involved. Give us a thumbs up on the YouTube and subscribe to the channel. It's all free. All that's left for me to say, Patrick McGill, thanks for joining me once again on A Celtic State of Mind.